time to react in such situations you won't believe is in seconds. This cabin altitude can shoot above 30,000 feet in a matter of seconds. At that cabin altitude, the air is thinner than standing at the top of the Mount Everest with bare minimum or no oxygen. Hey everyone, I hope you're doing great. In this video, I'm going to bring forth one of the most important things that we miss out when we fly on airplanes. During the beginning of the flight, you have been presented with the safety demonstration of the airplane by the cabin crew. And over a period of time, people don't pay much attention to the cabin safety demonstration. But there is a very important detail that is being ignored by the passengers, which I'm going to highlight today. We all know that airplanes generally cruise around 30 to 40,000 feet during the flight. And if there is sudden loss of cabin pressure, either due to damage or malfunction of the airplane, you will not have much time to react if you delay wearing of the oxygen mask. The time to react in such situations you won't believe is in seconds. The reason behind that is, generally in a normal flight, the aircraft altitude is about 30,000 feet. But the cabin altitude is maintained around 5 to 8,000 feet by a sophisticated aircraft pressurization system. So the air at those cabin altitude has good enough breathing oxygen. It's like the air one breathes while staying on a hill station. Almost all airplanes have cabin altitude warning system that activates only when altitude inside the aircraft exceeds 10,000 feet. The cabin altitude warning strongly suggests to the pilots that the aircraft had sustained some structural damage or the pressurization of the aircraft has failed. If the cabin altitude climbs to the same altitude as the airplane's flight altitude, breathing difficulties arise. If the oxygen masks are not worn, a condition known as hypoxia, which occurs when the human body or a region of the body is deprived of adequate oxygen supply at tissue level. This condition can be really fatal if not addressed immediately. Breathing without oxygen mask for extended periods becomes difficult at these altitudes. Whenever we go at higher altitudes, air density and pressure decreases, leading to reduced oxygen availability for breathing. Regulations mandate providing artificial oxygen to the crew and passengers in such scenarios, generally in case of a loss of pressurization of an aircraft and flying above 10,000 feet. This is a major emergency situation. Due to decreased air density and pressure at such altitudes, our lungs cannot process oxygen effectively. Moreover, if the aircraft becomes unpressurized due to severe damage, the pressure difference between the cabin and the outside air, which is typically maintained around 7 to 8 psi or pounds per square inch, starts dropping to zero. So if a sudden loss of cabin pressurization occurs, this cabin altitude can shoot above 30,000 feet in a matter of seconds. At that cabin altitude, the air is thinner than standing at the top of the Mount Everest with bare minimum or no oxygen. The human body in such conditions only have few seconds before one can get unconscious and faint. So if you look at this chart, it's a chart of time for useful consciousness. As you can see, a normal person's consciousness can last from a minute to few seconds, depending upon what is the cabin altitude of the aircraft at the time of malfunction or just soon after. So it is very important to wear the oxygen mask immediately when they're deployed in the cabin, and then only help your nearby passengers or family members, because in the panic to help them, you might end up being unconscious yourself. The airplane system can automatically deploy these passenger oxygen masks when cabin altitude crosses 14,000 feet. Generally, most of the commercial airlines have approximately 15 minutes of oxygen for passengers. It's a mixture of chemically generated oxygen as well as the ambient air. So this time is sufficient enough to descend the aircraft at around 10,000 feet cabin altitude from approximately 40,000 feet by the pilots. The pilots are trained skillfully and being tested periodically to execute this maneuver during their simulator training sessions. This procedure is called emergency descent. The action of the emergency descent are a part of memory items. That means the pilots have to execute the initial and critical steps of this checklist by memory. They have to rapidly descend the aircraft using high speed, speed brakes, or even landing gear to increase the rate of descent. The rate of descent could reach 4,000 to 7,000 feet per minute. So within 6 to 10 minutes, an aircraft can reach 10,000 feet or minimum altitude above the terrain. When flying over mountainous regions, there is a strong possibility that the airplane has to maintain safe altitude above the high terrain at higher altitudes for quite some time before it can descend to 10,000 feet or safe altitude during the sudden loss of cabin pressure. So when you're flying over high mountainous regions where the terrain is above 14,000 feet, then the airlines have to either change the routing or find the escape route if the flight doesn't meet the passenger oxygen requirements. So next time when you fly, don't miss out on this important detail and be mindful to make air travel safer. Also, don't forget to watch the next video on airplane safety. See you in the next one.